If you've ever wondered about NLP eye movements and found it all a bit confusing, let me take you through what it entails and how you can use them to be more effective with people that are in your life, be it personal or professional. Hi, Leslie Hornsby here. Welcome to my channel again. Here I talk about and teach people just like you all about the brilliant cutting edge techniques that NLP can offer. NLP is all about leading a more fulfilling life and taking charge of your thinking, your emotions and your behaviour. If you'd like to know more, then just please click subscribe and you'll get future videos every time I post, which is every week. And if you think life coaching might be a help, then I'm happy to talk things through with you. You just need to use the link below that I've added for an obligation-free telephone appointment. So the relationship between thinking and eye movements was one of the first observations made when NLP began around the early 70s. The relationship can provide valuable information on how to best communicate with someone. Developing this skill using NLP eye movements, it will enable you to recognise how a person may be thinking, though not necessarily what they're thinking about. And many people mainly think in terms of images, and there'll be others who think in terms of self-talk, those that think about it as feelings, and others, a small minority, in terms of sound. It's also important to understand that the standard NLP eye directions are not definitive. Not everyone follows the rules, for want of a better description. Not everyone looks up and to the left to visualise or down and to the right when they're thinking or feeling. So whilst many do, by that same token there are always exceptions. For example, if someone is asked to think about recent events or information with which they're very familiar, they may display no eye movement at all. Even the original developers of NLP warn that these standard directions are not unquestionably reliable, but rather as a starting point, a sort of hypothesis to be checked. You may question then, why pay attention to this NLP theory? Well, being able to notice a person's eye movement and direction to recognise what they might indicate can provide useful information about how they're thinking. Perhaps you need to explain how to do something and your colleague or student is finding it difficult to follow your instructions. You can see that they're looking up and to the left or the right, and that is indicative that they're likely to be visualising or at least trying to visualise. In a case like that, you might find that demonstrating as well as verbally explaining is going to be a vast improvement in the success of your communication because they respond more readily to the visual. If, on the other hand, they're looking down or to the right, it may suggest that the individual is thinking in terms of the kinesthetic, which is another word for feeling. This is an indication that the person's preferred communication or learning style is rooted in actively doing a task rather than just passively listening or imagining. And it's also true, by the way, that in this context, many people are rarely consciously aware of how they think, but by paying attention and being aware of these eye movements, you can become a skilled observer and communicator. So, having established that people do differ and not everyone will have the same pattern, it's recommended that you treat the directional concepts just as a guide and combine this with other NLP observational skills so that you can determine someone's personal representational preference by recognising the clues they display in front of you. Having said all that, let's look then, working purely on the basis of generalisation, at the standard eye movements. So looking up and to the right indicates the visual remembered. This is when an image has been seen or imagined before. Also, some people will access visual remembered by sort of defocusing their eyes as well. Questions that prompt this response might be, what colour was the room that you grew up in? How many TVs are in your house? What was the colour of your first bicycle? What kind of pattern have you got on your duvet? Glancing laterally to the right of your ear is called audio remembered, and that's prompted by something that you've never heard before. And this could be a conversation or a sound, or it could be of yourself or someone else. Examples of the questions to ask would be, what was the very last thing I said? Can you remember the sound of your grandmother's voice? Who did you speak to the last time you were on your mobile phone? Or how does your car engine sound? Looking down to the right, that indicates someone's accessing internal dialogue. You can simulate this response asking questions such as, can you say the alphabet inside your head? Take a moment and listen to the sound of your own inner voice. In what types of situations do you talk to yourself the most? Now, looking up and to the left, known as the visual construct, is evident when you're accessing an image that you need to construct that you've never seen before. And when you make pictures up in your head, you're using visual constructed. The kinds of questions that can promote responses in this way would be, what would your room look like as a mirror image? What would a cross between a dog and giraffe look like? Think about a red and white zebra. Glancing left laterally at ear level is the audio construct. It generally occurs when accessing something that you've never heard before, or when you have to construct a sound or conversation. Questions that prompt this response would be something like, what if I sounded like a cartoon character Popeye? Imagine a train whistle shifting into the sounds of waves crashing. Hear the sound of a violin and then a parent's voice at the same time. Eyes down and to the left, that is kinesthetic response, and that's when you access either emotional internal feelings or external ones, so physical tactile sensations such as when you touch something that has a distinct sensation such as velvet. Even intangible kinesthetic responses are often associated with a location in your body, just as they would be when you're dealing with physical sensations. Questions that elicit this response: what does it feel like to touch warm sand? What does ice feel like in your mouth? How does it feel to be exhausted? These patterns appear to be fairly constant for right-handed people. There are exceptions, such as the Basque people in Spain, who appear to feature a notable number of exceptions to the rule. And when it comes to left-handed people, the trend reveals a reverse of left to right, and that's to say the eye accessing cues are the mirror image of those of the average right-hander. So, for example, when referencing feelings, they look down and the left instead of right. And similarly for visual imagery, they'll look up and right rather than up and left, and so on. It's probably no surprise either that there's always going to be a small discrete number of people, including those who are ambidextrous and a few right-handers too, who reverse some but not all of their eye accessing cues. The best way to explore and get clarity on the relationship between eye movements is to try them out. Try some exercises with a partner. So prep with specific questions so that you can then observe their eye movements. Now, I've created a handout with a number of questions that should elicit different eye movement responses, and that should help you track your partner's eye movements. And you'll find that I've put a link below to this video so that you can get hold of that PDF. So observing eye movements, when used with skill, it's a great addition to your toolkit for communicating effectively with others, but you do need to observe more than just eye movements and look for congruence in their non-verbal communication in order to more accurately assess their responses. This skill is best learned on a live workshop, to be honest, where you can be coached in the subtleties of observing and understanding eye movements. However, there is an especially valuable tip which everyone can use without attending a training program, and that is to say that if a person's eyes are moving, it indicates that they're thinking. So you need to remain quiet until their eyes stop moving and they look back at you. So what about when you're tracking the eye pattern that some subject doesn't seem to be following a standard response when you've asked specific questions? Can you still figure out even then if they're not following the pattern? Now, people tend to be far more complex and their responses are unlikely to always follow this pretty simplistic pattern, even when you've very specifically and precisely tried to direct that person's attention towards thinking in the way that you want them to think. So you might expect, for example, that if you've asked someone to think of a family member's face, that they're going to look up and look left. And if maybe you ask them to think of something unusual, perhaps fantastical, like an animal that's half giraffe, half lion, that it's quite possible they're going to look up and to the right because they're constructing the image, given that it's something that they haven't ever actually seen. At least we hope they haven't. Another context where eye movement can be skewed is when someone is remembering something but they do it in an associated state. What I mean by that is they actually place themselves within the memory. Now the image is no longer right or left, so despite being a memory which is understood to be to the left, and it also may have an auditory component as well, so we've established that remembered sound or hearing is always to the left, but because they've placed themselves in the scene, so to speak, they're now viewing that memory from a sort of first person perspective looking around and seeing and hearing things from that viewpoint. Now that is inevitably going to affect the direction that their eyes move in. And of course, there's generally a lot more going on, perhaps thinking of a simple image or a simple sound. Let's say someone asks you to think about an object, but it's something that can either be imagined or it could be derived from memory. So for example, you're asked to think about a handbag. Do you imagine and construct a visual of a handbag that you haven't necessarily seen before? Or is it going to be one of a memory, a specific handbag? In these kinds of cases, your eye movements are going to go either way. The same is also true in the case of asking people to think about their life and memories as a timeline. And for those who don't know about timelines, this is when you ask someone to view their life in terms of their past, present and future, and it's stretched out on a line, basically. And for many people that will mean for what they see in the past, it stretches behind them, or for the future, that stretches ahead of them. And if they're positioned in the centre within that line, then the present is within their person. If someone's viewing things and events in this way, it can then affect the direction of their eye movement, particularly when recalling from the past or seeing things in the future. So it's also useful to bear in mind that when someone's in conversation, often they may well be thinking of a number of different things other than what's being said in the conversation. So eyes might be moving in a variety of directions as they process their thoughts. So broadly speaking, there are a few cues that you can generally rely on, so that if someone, say, looks up, there's a good chance they're visualizing, and if they look down, that's generally indicating that they're feeling or attending to an inner dialogue. Now, I guess the best way to interpret and use this information is to just be aware of someone's eye movements and how that correlates to the words that they use. Also be sensitive to eye direction when you ask particular questions, and try not to prejudge, just take in the body language and don't forget to notice what else is being communicated. Becoming expert in eye movement patterns is a really good way to connect with someone on a much deeper level. More than just listening to their words, it can create much deeper rapport and help you establish trust quickly. Even if they're unaware of your scrutiny, it does convey a greater concentration and attention directed at them, and that is something that most people respond to really positively when it's done well. Once confident in eye movements as accessing cues, your ability to read them, there are going to be a lot of ways they can be used. So habitual eye movements help you recognize a person's preferred sensory modality. So for example, you ask them to think of something that's really important to them. Where they glance as they answer that question will likely identify something about their most valued representational system, be it visual, auditory, kinesthetic, etc. Finally, eye movements can also help determine how truthful or congruent a person is being. So let's say that they're describing an event that they've witnessed or participated in. If, for instance, their eyes primarily move to the left, particularly if they're right-handed, it indicates memory access. If, however, they predominantly look up and right, it's likely they're constructing or reconstructing some aspect of that experience that they're describing. This may flag that the person is either uncertain or not being entirely truthful about what they're saying. The most common application of eye positions in NLP is to determine the representational strategies a person is using in order to think or make a decision. Since many aspects of people's thinking processes are unconscious to them, spontaneous eye movement can be extremely important as part of an elicitation in modelling a person's inner strategies for decision making, learning, motivation and memory. So there you have it, learning about eye movement accessing cues. Fairly straightforward process, but it does take practice. And don't forget, don't be slavishly following it as a definitive guide to someone's thinking, but merely as a guide that can be incorporated into a properly considered communication process. If you have any experience of this NLP tool, or you have an opinion on it, on its application, or any other NLP technique for that matter, it would be great to hear about it. So please do take some time to share it with me in the comments below. And if you'd like to explore more fully how you can change how you think or deal with mental blocks or limiting beliefs, and you think life coaching with NLP might be something you'd like to try, then all you have to do is use the link I've added below to this video, and you can get in touch, make a 30-minute appointment with me for a preliminary obligation-free chat. And don't forget, there's a link to access a free handout detailing the NLP eye accessing cues, as well as a free guide to 3 more NLP techniques. You just use the respective links below that I've added. Don't forget to click subscribe to get more of these videos on this YouTube channel, because I post each and every week. And I really hope you can join me again next time for more of some of NLP's cutting edge processes designed to help you lead a more fulfilling life. In the meantime, thank you very much for your company. It's been great to see you again. I hope to see you next time. But for now, see you soon.